You're listening to the UBC Medicine Learning Network.
Hello and welcome to MEDamorphosis, the show that interviews physicians about their medical journey with the aim of helping students navigate their careers. My name is Monica and I'm a second-year UBC medical student. I'm recording this episode from my home, which is located on the traditional ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. On today's episode, we are exploring the use of AI in healthcare with Dr. Leo Celi. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your story? How did you end up doing what you're doing? And what are you doing right now?
Hey, thanks for inviting me to speak with you, Monica. My name is Leo. I work in the intensive care unit at Beth Deaconess Medical Center, providing care for patients who develop critical illness. Research is based at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The group is called Laboratory for Computational Physiology, and we lead a global consortium called MIT Critical Data, whose mission and vision is to put data and learning at the front and center of healthcare. We actually believe that data and learning are the best medicine for population health, not some drug, some vaccination, or surgical intervention. And what we do is we build communities around data and learning, and the community consists of healthcare professionals. So, not just doctors, but nurses and pharmacists and therapists. And we interface our communities with computer scientists and engineers. And increasingly, we have been recruiting more social scientists, so sociologists and anthropologists. And the idea is to extract knowledge from data that is routinely collected in the process of care, and that is typically in the form of electronic health records. But we also do not stop with knowledge extraction. We need to translate that knowledge into better processes so that we could deliver more equitable outcomes to our patients.
Yeah, wow. It sounds like you have quite the holistic practice where you're both interfacing with patients, but being able to also have that quality improvement and advancing research in the background as well. Have you always wanted to be a physician scientist, or was that something that you kind of went into later on?
I think it's a product of growth, of personal and professional growth. The more I practice medicine, the more uncertain I am that I'm truly delivering the best possible care to each and every patient. Very early on, I realized the limitations of the current medical knowledge system, where clinical trials are only performed in rich countries, where clinical trials where 80% of the clinical trials happen in 20% of the countries, where only 10% of the expenditure on health research and development is spent on diseases that affect 90% of the global population. So there is a huge imbalance of our understanding of health and disease. And this is primarily from observations and trials involving a dominant demographic group, the white male demographic, specifically in rich countries. And that's how we derive the knowledge that informs how we prevent, how we diagnose, how we treat diseases. And it became a goal, it became a life passion that we need to do something about the way we create and validate medical knowledge. It has to be more inclusive, it has to be more representative. Each country should be capable of creating their own version of the medical knowledge system rather than waiting for guidelines to come from American Heart Association or the Canadian Society of Radiology. We think that that is an outdated approach and probably contributed or is contributing to the preservation of all the problems that we see, which is health disparities and suboptimal outcomes to a lot of groups of patients who have been excluded really in this system of, of medical knowledge creation and translation.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating. And I know everyone listening to this would love to hear more about how your work in data science can really help improve that level of disparity and inequity in our society currently.
So I think the first uh, eureka moment in my career is realizing that clinical trials, it, I mean, there's definitely some awareness that this is the gold standard to evaluate interventions and other health products. But as we know, they are very expensive to conduct. And this is the reason why they only happen in rich countries. And the other early realization that we've stumbled upon is the fact that medical truth is fleeting. We always say that there is no ground truth. The ground truth continuously shifts. So, whatever findings that we had in 1995 will have likely changed, transformed, and we can no longer rely on those trials from a few years ago, which means that we should be ready to repeat clinical trials every so often on every question and looking at every population, which is never going to happen. So it's not just impossible from an economic standpoint. Logistically, it's also not going to happen because to be able to conduct a clinical trial, it takes years and years. So to me, the alternative is to complement clinical trials with data science. So leveraging the natural experimentation that happens every day in hospitals and clinics to understand better and to really contribute to what we refer to as precision medicine. People have been talking about personalized medicine and precision medicine since the turn of the century. And unfortunately, we have not made any headway. Um, and I think it's because there is not enough competency in data science
Mhm,
because precision medicine will require a lot of data science, will
mhm,
require a lot of big data sets.
mhm,
And without that, we should not be dreaming of precision medicine. Again,
mhm,
I think it's wishful thinking that we are going to have personalized, precise algorithms without any data to build those algorithms.
mhm,
And unless we invest on building capacity in data science, unless we start teaching data science from grade school through middle and high school through college and medical and graduate schools, it's unlikely that we're going to get any value from these very powerful technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the functions that you were talking about reflects on a lot of functions of machine learning and artificial intelligence. I was wondering if you can give our audience a bit of a background in terms of like what artificial intelligence means in our current landscape, and how does that intersect with the data science that your work is based on?
Basically, it all boils down to allowing data to come up with the rules that inform the way we make decisions. That is what artificial intelligence is. And yes, there is some confusion of what is machine learning versus artificial intelligence versus data science. I'm not too concerned if people have some misunderstanding of where is the boundary of machine learning versus artificial intelligence. In essence, what we are referring to is we feed gobs and gobs of data into some computer, and the computer learns how humans make decisions. And we also can now map decisions to outcomes of the patients. and it starts coming up with rules based on what it learns from the data to optimize the interventions, the health products that we have, and truly offer it only among people who will benefit from it. So this is the idea behind machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, is to truly learn from everything that we do minute by minute, so that we are not just waiting for some professional society to look at the body of evidence to come up with guidelines. And as you probably know, most of those guidelines would say that there is no good evidence.
Mhm.
At this point, this is what we recommend, but we're aware that the
Mhm.
evidence is very, very fragile for
Mhm.
this aspects of the disease.
Mhm.
So, and this is where data science would come in.
Mhm.
What we would like to do is to build models, build algorithms that can help clinicians and patients make decisions
Mhm.
or provide some um, differential diagnosis or impression about what's going on as regards their health.
Mhm.
And the key component there is data.
Mhm.
So no data, no artificial intelligence. And then at some point, we realize that the data that we're using is full of bias. And bias means different. And we need to clarify what we mean when we say bias, because from a statistical test or statistical uh, aspect, bias is just how off it is from the ground truth.
Mhm.
Bias, when I use that term, refers to data issues that can lead to imperfect representation of what's happening in the real world.
Mhm.
And when that's the case, if your data is full of these issues, so I'm going to refrain from using bias,
Mhm.
then you're going to have problems with
Mhm.
the models that you build. And
Mhm.
there is a huge risk for the models that you build to reflect the problems that we're seeing in the real world.
Mhm.
But that is the idea behind machine learning, behind artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
and it is what fuels the research that we're doing.
Wow, I feel like there was a lot of pearls in what you said there. So I'm just gonna kind of recap that because I think that's really what a lot of the audience is interested in. So it sounds like the value of AI currently is that real-time collection of data, as well as this constant accumulation of more up-to-date data and constant more like reflection of the patient group that we're serving, so that we're not using data from say 50 years ago or say from a very specific group of people to serve the community that's very much diverse and different from when those data points are presented. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of this data and what biases and I guess, representation that could be involved in it. So when we're analyzing the data sets, we need to be very critical in how we use that data set. Could you expand a little bit more on um, data bias and how we can potentially mitigate that?
So we have an ongoing list, and the list is by no means complete, about sources of data bias in electronic health records. The one that has been in the headlines is bias that result from the use of medical devices that do not perform consistently across groups of patients. And the one that we have read about is the pulse oximeter. So a pulse oximeter, if people are not familiar, is a gadget that estimates the amount of oxygen in your body. So it uses infrared technology to provide some estimation of how much oxygen is uh, contained in your bloodstream. The gold standard would be to draw blood from you and send that to the laboratory and measure. the partial pressure of oxygen, the amount of saturation. But that is clearly not possible. Like, for example, in the intensive care unit or in the operating theater, you cannot be drawing blood for their entire stay. So there is this very powerful technology that can be used non-invasively so that you could have continuous monitoring of the amount of oxygen. I'm hoping that most of you have an idea of what I'm talking about. And then it's funny because from the very start, from the 70s, when they were patented, there is already an awareness that it doesn't work well if you are of color, because it interferes with the light properties, which is integral to this technology. So now we have this technology that is ubiquitously used in hospitals and clinics that estimates the amount of oxygen in the bloodstream. And we know they don't work well among individuals of color, meaning a certain number means different depending on whether you're black or you're light skinned. And the computer does not know that. So to them, this is just a number. They're not aware that this particular technology, it has to be careful in terms of how it interprets that number. And the pulse oximeter is just but one of several technologies that we know do not perform consistently across patients. We published a review of, I believe, about 8 to 10 devices in the intensive care unit that are known to have the same problem as the pulse oximeter. And right now, people are just putting all this troves of data without telling the computer things that they need to know before they start using these numbers to build algorithms. Um, Another source of data bias that is often overlooked is from sampling selection. So, for example, our data set, which is the Medical Information Mart for Intensive Care, it is a data set that is obtained from patients who are admitted to all the intensive care units of Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. The question that we would like the students to think before they use it is who got into the database and who did not get into the database. Because when the people in the database do not represent the community at large, population at large, then what happens as a result of the sampling selection is that computers learn some spurious associations that are not real. And I will give you a very good example just to elaborate on what I am talking about with regard to sampling selection. There was a study that was published during the pandemic, and it wanted to know what are the predictors of death if someone comes down with a COVID infection and they are admitted to the hospital. And the study was performed on patients who were admitted to the Veterans Administration in the United States. So these are retired or active members of the military. And that population is very different from the US population. And when you look at the main table in that paper, what we find is that the study concluded that advanced age is associated with worse outcomes, which is not surprising. But then you scroll down on the table and then you start getting this findings that smoking is actually a predictor of good outcomes among patients who got ill from COVID. And there is also another part of the table that says that if you're overweight, you're also likely to have better outcomes from COVID. And for those of us who were working in the intensive care unit during the pandemic, we knew that this is wrong. And then when you drill deeper, what could have caused this problematic findings? It's because of sampling selection. It turns out that there's not a lot of veterans who do not smoke. The vast majority of them smoke, which is, of course, very different from the American community where the vast majority do not smoke.
Mhm.
And then it's the same thing if they're non-smokers or if they're not obese, if they have a healthy body mass index,
Mhm.
if they develop COVID, they are unlikely to present to the hospital because they are not as sick. So
Mhm.
suddenly the hospital population is very different from the population that you're wanting to build a
Mhm.
model on.
Mhm.
And this is perhaps one of the biggest problems that most of the machine learning community is not even aware of,
Mhm.
because they have a database land in their lap and
Mhm.
they just build a model
Mhm.
for prediction or optimization,
Mhm.
maximizing the accuracy of that model,
Mhm.
not realizing that, hey, I excluded a lot of people and yet I want the model to be used for those people too.
Mhm.
So our message to the machine learning community out there and also the clinicians who are interested in this is
Mhm.
you need to understand what we refer to as the social patterning of the data generation process. You
Mhm.
need to understand all the sources of problematic issues within the data.
Mhm.
Because if you don't understand that, I can assure you your models will encode
Mhm.
those problems. Your
Mhm.
model will encode all the health disparities that we're seeing now.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, that's I feel like that's a lot of bias involved in something that's so basic like a pulse oximeter. I feel like every physician, healthcare worker at one point in your day will use that pulse oximeter. And to hear that the bias is and like the misinformation is so entrenched into your everyday life, I feel like is honestly shell shocking and makes you want to, take a step back and really try to reflect on how we carry out our day to day practices and how we see our patients. Do you think that like we can ever get to a place where we can have a group of scientists, data researchers, and a group that truly is representative of the people that we're serving, develop an algorithm that could potentially mitigate most of the biases? Or do you think there's always going to be a component where it's socially driven, where we need physicians and our community to constantly be aware of the mistakes that can make in the machine? So I feel like that's a pretty long question. So let me rephrase. Do you think the machine can ever get to a place where it's mostly accurate, or do you think this like critical lens of how we look at data and how we look at artificial intelligence needs to always be there?
Oh, we always need everyone on the table, as we keep saying. We cannot build a system that will be better than what we have now, um, unless we change our strategy. Because, as we said, there is a fundamental problem with creating artificial intelligence that you validate by looking at its accuracy against real world data. That to me is a system perfectly designed to permanently ingrain the health disparities. I think that it is definitely possible to use artificial intelligence to inch our world closer to what we aspire it to be.
Hmm.
But it will need a lot of redesigning
Hmm.
how we are developing artificial intelligence now.
Hmm.
I will give you a good example. The area of fairness in health AI is a very topical topic right now. And the way that the machine learning community is evaluating fairness is just looking at how a model performs across different groups. And we have observed very early on that the performance of a model is not consistent. It's typically optimized towards the majority population, which means that those who are marginalized, those who are at the fringes, are more likely to be harmed by the models.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that this is a requisite step for us to be able to move towards a world where AI is going to lead to more equitable outcomes. We need to make sure that the model performs consistently. I agree with that, but that is just the first step. So
Mm-hmm.
having a model that is accurate across different patient groups, it just means that it will perpetuate whatever outcomes those
Mm-hmm.
groups are getting now. So I was commenting this yesterday, actually. It was a Fairness in Health AI community. And I'm saying that we need more viewpoints because we ourselves had the same training. We see the problem from the same lens. And it's unlikely that we're going to be fixing this. I keep reiterating that fairness is not a machine learning problem. People think that, oh, we're computer scientists, we could fix fairness. Again, that refers to what I call technology bias, that technology can fix broken systems.
Mm-hmm.
So we are saying that we need to work more closely with economists, with social scientists, because fairness is not a straightforward concept. And the other thing that I keep pointing out is that how dare we define fairness for the rest of the world? Like, who are we? We are all privileged individuals. And here we are saying that we understand fairness and we could define it for everyone else. That to me is a perfect example of AI, arrogance and ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been the way we have been solving problems in the last century. And I'm excited that I think that finally we have an opportunity to move away from that way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, diversity has become at the forefront
Mm-hmm.
of the research enterprise
Mm-hmm.
and of academia. So, to me, there is an opportunity here that we need to really take advantage of and embrace.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, although I may sound very pessimistic about AI at its current form, I think that it will be a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
That if we design this right, we will definitely be able to come up with innovations that will truly benefit majority of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like as a society, we often think about technology as the way forward that solves a lot of our efficacy problems, a lot of our inequity problems, but there's definitely a lot of biases ingrained in how we think about technology. I know we kind of chatted a little bit about industry bias. Can you expand a little bit more on that topic?
Industry bias. This it's a myth that industry is able to build more efficient systems, and that when industry gets involved, there is sustainability and there's more effectiveness in the way we build solutions. And that is not the case. Again, industry tends to not really understand the messy interplay of politics, culture, belief systems, value systems that are, for the most part, the biggest obstacles in being able to innovate in healthcare.
Hmm.
And we are alarmed by how industry is spearheading the AI revolution
Hmm.
because we know that the objectives and the mission of industry, it's not health equity, it's not reducing disparities, it
Hmm.
is making revenue
Hmm.
and margins.
Hmm.
So I still think that they have a role to play.
Hmm.
They are at the forefront of developing the technology, but they need to work more closely with not just academia, but with patients and their caregivers.
Hmm.
So we always say we need to give seats at the table for people who are most likely going to be impacted by
Mhm.
the technology.
Mhm.
And that hasn't really happened to any degree at this point. One of my favorite quotes is that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu.
Mhm.
People are probably taking advantage of you.
Mhm.
And the only way for us to make sure that AI truly delivers its promise is to bring in citizen scientists. So I think that we need to push for citizen science.
Mhm.
And that means that we have to do a better job in teaching
Mhm.
uh, machine learning, data science to everyone in society.
Mhm.
What we think is the biggest obstacle right now in AI delivering its promise is the fact that the most of society, most of the world do not understand what machine learning is, what AI is, what it can do, what the opportunities are, and more importantly, what are the risks of harm, what are potential unintended consequences.
Mhm.
We cannot delegate this to the industry leaders. We cannot say that they know the way, they will do what's good for us,
Mhm.
and therefore we will be passive backseat um, passengers in
Mhm.
this revolution.
Mhm.
We need to take the steering wheel from them.
Mhm.
This is the only way forward.
Mhm.
And as I said, we're alarmed by the fact that the ones who scream the loudest about health AI, they're coming from Microsoft and Google and OpenAI and
Mhm.
Epic.
Mhm.
We are heading the wrong direction if we let this continue.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like this has been a conversation that us as North Americans have kind of wanted to have for a really long time. How do we balance kind of productivity and this society that we live in, where we a lot of times value like capitalism and a lot of our output more than a lot of the values and systems that we have in this world? So I think one value that underpins technology and industry is productivity. So I think a lot of people, when they think of artificial intelligence as the future, that is what we're getting at. We're getting at how do we decrease the um, workload of a lot of doctors doing paperwork? How do we make it so that we can make radiological diagnoses faster? Do you have any advice in terms of how we can move forward and increase our productivity without kind of relying on these systems that might potentially not misalign with our values inherently?
I mean, we need more task shifting. At present, a lot of healthcare providers are performing tasks that don't add value to the patient, to the provider, to the system. But we're not trained to be engineers, so to be able to figure out how to do task shifting, how to come up with better clinical workflows, we need to have undergone some training in re-engineering, redesigning systems.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, our entire medical school is about regurgitating mechanisms
Hmm.
from textbooks.
Hmm.
And there is some focus on critical thinking, but not systems critical thinking. It's critical thinking on pathophysiology, but not critical thinking that involves redesigning the systems that unfortunately influence the way we deliver care.
Hmm.
And somehow every clinician has to be a systems engineer to a certain degree. That's the
Hmm.
only way forward.
Hmm.
Everyone has to be constantly thinking of how can we improve the way we deliver care? How can we improve our understanding of what's happening to the patient?
Hmm.
Um, and there has to be a major overhaul of the medical curriculum, which is probably unlikely going to happen because it is such a conservative bastion that will
Hmm.
not readily transform its courses.
Hmm. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of change that needs to be done in terms of like our medical community as well as like how physicians think about healthcare as well. If you can give a prediction of what do you think the medical community and healthcare in general would look like in about 50 to 100 years, like what would you say? What would you say it would look like?
I don't have a clue. And my answer to that is when people stumbled upon, or not really stumbled upon, because they did a lot of what do you call this, research to produce the very first version of the internet.
Hmm.
They have no clue how the internet would transform our lives.
Hmm.
And for that reason, I cannot make any prediction. Like, there are no futuristic movies from the 60s or 70s that I think uh, predicted anywhere uh, near what we have right now in terms of the information age.
Hmm.
And for that reason, I will not commit to some prediction. And you've heard that some people have erroneously made that mistake in the past, with Jeff Hinton saying that there will no longer be radiologists in 5 years' time. And those comments haunt them
Yeah.
in 2023. So I don't think we're capable of even imagining what we could have if we design the system right. And I think it's also important to mention that we cannot design AI in a vacuum. We need to design a system where AI is working hand in hand with humans. Because right now, all the design is separate from, there is this human world and there's this AI component, and we
Hmm.
cannot do that.
Hmm.
The system has to have full integration of the humans with AI.
Hmm.
And once again, that cannot happen if the humans do not understand AI. Like, forget about any integration.
Hmm.
And that's why I think we need to work faster and harder in making sure that we educate people about artificial intelligence.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like on that note of collaboration and cooperation, that brings us to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much, Leo, for your time. On this podcast, we always like to end with one question. So, if you could give current medical students a piece of advice, what would you say to them?
I would say start reaching out to people outside of your close knit world. Most of the time, medical students are siloed in their medical school, and they come out of the medical school completely oblivious of what's happening in the world. And I think that you're doing yourself uh, a, uh, a disfavor by being holed up and just looking at your books, just talking about patients. And you need to talk more with computer scientists, with social scientists, with people outside your background. If you surround yourself with people who have the same perspectives and training as you, then you're not going to go very far, especially in this world where we inherit all these problems that have been in existence for centuries. And to think that you're smarter than the previous generation is once again an example of AI, arrogance, and ignorance. So to me, really reach out and especially understand the problem from the lenses of those who live those problems. So, and I'm guilty of this. I read about the problem and I think that I understand it. But right now, our goal is to surround ourselves with our colleagues from other parts of the world, or even within the United States. Make sure that you are constantly and continuously conversing with people who are not normally in your circles, because that's where we get the most creative ideas. That's
Hmm.
where we're able to reframe the problem in a way that we can actually solve them. So that's my advice to all the students out there who are listening to this podcast.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful message. And I know I learned a lot, and I know everyone who is listening has learned a lot as well. Thank you for your time, Leo.
My pleasure.
This has been a presentation of the UBC Medicine Learning Network.